What the hell is that smell? Oh, it's you.
Sergeant Holloway
Get
stood
out.
over booth 4, staring
You're
down at the black
disgusting.
man like something stuck to his boot.
Nobody wants to eat looking at you.
I'm a paying customer, Sergeant. Just having lunch.
Holloway snatched the tray and hurled it to the floor. The plate shattered.
Lunch?
Gravy splattered up the man's pants. Sweet tea spread across the tile like a stain. Holloway leaned in close.
Now crawl down there and lick it up. That's where dogs eat.
Silence. Every fork in that diner stopped moving. The man looked at the mess, then looked up, not shaking, not flinching, and spoke softly.
Are you finished?
What Holloway didn't know was that the quiet man in the worn jacket had been watching him for 6 weeks, and what he was about to set on that table would end everything. 6 weeks earlier, a Greyhound bus pulled into the Millhaven terminal at noon on a Tuesday. The station, if you could call it that, was a concrete bench under a tin awning, sitting at the edge of a Chevron gas station parking lot. The kind of stop where the driver didn't even announce the name. He just opened the door and waited. One man stepped off. Oliver Davis carried a single duffel bag over his left shoulder and a leather backpack that had seen better decades. He wore a canvas jacket with a torn pocket, work boots with scuffed toes, and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. If you saw him on the street, you would think construction worker, maybe a retired mechanic, maybe a man between jobs looking for a cheap room and a fresh start. That was the point. Oliver stood on the sidewalk and looked down Main Street. Millhaven, Alabama. Population 11,800. 61% black. 14% below the poverty line. 1 public school. 1 hospital. 1 police department. With 32 officers, 30 of whom were white. He had memorized every number before he got on the bus. 340 complaints of excessive force filed against the Millhaven Police Department in the past 5 years. 340 families who walked into the station, filled out the paperwork, signed their names, and waited. Not a single complaint had resulted in disciplinary action. Not one. Every file stamped with the same red ink. Reviewed, no further action required. Every stamp authorized by the same signature, Chief Randall Briscoe. Oliver had read those files in a windowless office in Washington, D.C. 11 weeks ago. He had read them once, then read them again, then closed the folder and sat in silence for a long time. 340. It wasn't the number that bothered him. It was the signature. The same hand, the same ink, the same 2 words. No further action. Written across the top of every single one, as if those families and their broken ribs and their bruised faces were nothing more than paperwork to be cleared before lunch. His supervisor, a woman named Deputy Assistant Attorney General Catherine Holt, had called him into her office the following Monday. She closed the door. She pulled down the blinds, and she said 6 words that put him on that Greyhound bus. Go there. Be nobody. Watch everything. So here he was. Nobody. Oliver walked 4 blocks east on Caldwell Avenue, past a boarded-up furniture store, a pawn shop with bars on every window, and a church with a handwritten sign taped to the door. Prayer meeting Wednesday. Lord, give us strength. The streets were clean but tired. Porches sagged. Gutters rusted. Every 3rd house had a foreclosure notice tacked to the mailbox. But what Oliver noticed most were the patrol cars. 2 cruisers parked outside a black-owned barbershop on 5th Street, not responding to a call. Just parked there, engines running, officers inside staring through the glass. A 3rd cruiser idling in front of a corner grocery, blocking half the entrance. A woman with 2 children squeezed past the hood of the car, grocery bags pressed to her chest, eyes down, moving fast. The way people move when they have learned that eye contact is a risk. Oliver counted 7 patrol cars in a 14-block walk. In a town with a violent crime rate below the state average. 7 cars. Not protecting, occupying. He found the address he was looking for at the end of Oakmont Road. A narrow 2-story house with a wraparound porch and flower boxes in the windows. A hand-painted sign hung from the railing. Rooms available. Weekly rates. The landlord was a 62-year-old black woman named Eleanor Finch, who had owned the house for 31 years, raised 3 children in it, and buried a husband from it. She had sharp eyes, a slow voice, and the kind of posture that said she had survived things she would never talk about unless you earned it. She showed Oliver the room upstairs. Small, clean, a single bed, a dresser, a window facing the street. $12 a night. "You here for work?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Hoping to find some," Oliver said. She studied him for a moment. Not suspicious, careful. The way someone studies a stranger in a town where strangers either mean trouble or need help. "There's a diner I run 2 blocks south," she said. "Breakfast starts at 6. Lunch ends at 2. You look like you could use a meal." "I appreciate that." She turned to leave, then stopped. Her hand rested on the doorknob and her voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the register people use when they are saying something they have said too many times and are tired of saying. "My son Daryl, 22 years old. Last October, Sergeant Holloway pulled him over on Route 9. Said he matched a description. There was no description. Daryl asked for the reason. Holloway broke his jaw. Right there on the shoulder of the road, in front of 2 other officers. Daryl spent 4 days in the hospital, filed a complaint. You know what happened?" Oliver waited. "Nothing. Not a thing. Complaint went in. Complaint disappeared. Holloway's still driving that same cruiser. Still pulling over the same kids. Still breaking the same bones." She looked at Oliver with eyes that had stopped expecting answers a long time ago. "So whatever you're here for, be careful. The uniform in this town doesn't protect you. It's the thing you need protecting from." She closed the door behind her. Oliver sat on the edge of the bed and listened to her footsteps fade down the stairs. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a laptop. Not the kind you buy at Walmart, but a government-issued ThinkPad with an encrypted hard drive and a biometric lock that required his right index fingerprint to open. He pressed his finger to the sensor. The screen lit up. A single file was already open. The header read, U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, case number CR-2024-0891. Subject, Mill Haven Police Department, Pattern and Practice Investigation. Classification, confidential. Undercover field assignment. Lead investigator, Oliver J. Davis, senior investigator. He scrolled through the first 30 pages. Names, dates, incident reports, medical records, photographs of bruises shaped like boot prints, a spreadsheet of civil asset forfeitures with dollar amounts that didn't add up, a map of traffic stops color-coded by the race of the driver. The black neighborhoods lit up like a heat signature. Oliver closed the laptop. He removed his reading glasses and set them on the dresser. Then he walked to the window and looked out at Oakmont Road. The streetlights were just coming on. A patrol car drifted past, slow and deliberate, its headlights sweeping across the front of Eleanor's house like a searchlight scanning a perimeter. He watched it pass. He did not flinch. He did not step back from the window. He had 6 weeks. 6 weeks to walk their streets, eat in their diners, sit in their churches, and watch what the Mill Haven Police Department did when they believed no one of consequence was looking. Tomorrow morning he would walk into Eleanor's diner, sit down in booth 4, and order a chicken fried steak. And he would wait. Sergeant Dwight Holloway pulled into the gravel lot behind Eleanor's diner at 7:15 the next morning, same as he had every morning for the past 9 years. Same cruiser, same parking spot. The one closest to the back door, the one no other officer dared take. Same heavy boots hitting the ground. Same walk, shoulders squared, belt loaded, chin tilted up just enough to let everyone in the room know that whatever happened next was entirely up to him. He pushed the door open with one hand. The bell jingled once and the diner went half a shade quieter, the way a classroom does when the principal walks in unannounced. Conversations didn't stop. They shrank. Eleanor was behind the counter, wiping the same spot she had already wiped twice. She didn't look up. She could identify Holloway by the sound of his boots, that slow, deliberate, heel-first stride that said, I own the ground I walk on. Morning, Eleanor. Coffee, black. And don't make me wait like last time. She poured it without a word. Holloway picked it up, took a sip, and didn't say thank you. He never said thank you. In 9 years, she had served him over 3,000 cups of coffee. He had never once acknowledged she was a human being doing him a kindness. He took his booth by the window. His booth. Everyone in Millhaven knew it was his, the same way they knew the cruiser in the lot was his, and the streets outside were his. Ownership not by deed, but by fear. The kind that doesn't need a signature because nobody dares challenge it. His phone rang. He answered on speaker, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. Yeah, last night, that little punk on Caldwell handled it. He laughed, a short, dry sound like a cough that enjoyed itself. Kept running his mouth about his rights. So I taught him what rights look like face down on a hood. A woman in the corner looked down at her eggs. A man near the register suddenly became very interested in his receipt. Eleanor's hand tightened around the dish rag. Reacting in front of Holloway was a luxury that came with consequences. That was when Deputy Cole Shepard walked in. Shepard was 36, lean and eager in the way small men are eager when they stand next to bigger ones. He had been Holloway's partner for 4 years, which meant he drove the second cruiser, laughed at every joke, backed every story, and never questioned an order. Shepard was not bad the way Holloway was bad. He was something worse, a man who had made cowardice his career. He knew what Holloway did. He watched it happen. He wrote the reports that made it disappear. Dwight. Shepard nodded toward booth 4. Who's that? Holloway looked over. The black man in the canvas jacket was sitting in the same booth, eating the same meal. Chicken fried steak, sweet tea, reading a newspaper, not looking up, not looking at anyone. That guy again? Holloway set his coffee down. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not concern, but the faint irritation of a man accustomed to obedience who had encountered something resembling disobedience. Eleanor moved quickly, stepping between the counter and Holloway's line of sight. He's just a guy passing through, renting a room at my place. Quiet, no trouble. Holloway didn't look at her. Everybody's no trouble until they are. He stood up, took his coffee, walked across the diner, slow, deliberate, making sure every eye tracked his path, and stopped at booth 4. He stood over Oliver the way a man stands over something he hasn't decided whether to step on or kick aside. Oliver looked up. No fear, no defiance, just the steady expression of a man who had been in rooms far more dangerous than this one and had learned that the first person to show emotion is the first person to lose control. You got a name? Oliver. Oliver what? Davis. Where you from, Oliver Davis? Up north. Up north. Holloway tasted the words like something sour. And what exactly is a man from up north doing in my town, sitting in my diner 2 days in a row? Eating breakfast, Sergeant. Same as everybody else. Holloway leaned down, close enough that Oliver could smell the coffee on his breath, the leather of his belt. Let me explain something to you, Oliver Davis. This town has a way of doing things. People like you eat, pay, and leave. You don't sit. You don't linger. You don't come back like you belong here because you don't. Oliver folded his newspaper, set it on the table, looked directly into Holloway's eyes. Understood, Sergeant, but he didn't move, didn't stand up, didn't reach for his wallet. He just sat there, hands folded, looking up at Holloway with the kind of stillness that has no translation except one. I am not afraid of you. Holloway held the stare for 3 seconds. Then he straightened up, turned, and walked back to his booth. He sat down hard, picked up his coffee, didn't drink it. Shepard leaned over. Want me to run his name? Don't bother, he's nobody. But Holloway kept looking at booth 4 for a long time after that. And somewhere behind his eyes, in a place he would never admit existed, something unfamiliar flickered. Brief, faint, instantly buried. Doubt. By the 3rd morning, Oliver Davis had become a fixture in booth 4, the way a crack in the wall becomes a fixture. Easy to ignore at first, impossible to stop noticing once you've seen it. He arrived at 6:45. He ordered the chicken fried steak, He drank his sweet tea slowly, read whatever newspaper Eleanor had left on the counter, and sat with the unhurried patience of a man who had no appointments, no deadlines, and absolutely nowhere else to be. He spoke to Eleanor when she brought his food. He thanked Nadine Buckley, the young waitress, when she refilled his tea. He said good morning to anyone who passed his booth, and then he sat, and he watched, and he waited. It was the waiting that bothered Holloway, not the man's presence. Holloway had dealt with presence before. Presence could be removed. A traffic citation, an ID check, a casual mention of a loitering ordinance that may or may not exist. Presence was a problem with simple solutions. But waiting was different. Waiting implied purpose. And purpose, in Holloway's experience, was dangerous. He came through the door at 7:20. Same boots, same walk, same silence falling across the room like a curtain being drawn. He took his booth. Eleanor brought his coffee. Shepard came in 4 minutes later and sat across from him. The morning routine, mechanical, rehearsed, unbroken for 4 years. But today, Holloway's eyes went to booth 4 before his coffee touched his lips. Oliver was reading. Same newspaper, same posture, same calm. 3 days, Holloway said.
Shepard looked over.
What? 3 days that guy's been sitting there, same booth, same meal, 3 days. Maybe he likes the food. Nobody likes food that much. Holloway picked up his coffee, took a long sip, and set it down with the careful deliberation of a man making a decision. He stood up. Shepard started to stand too. Holloway put a hand on his shoulder. Stay. And walked across the diner alone. He didn't stop at the edge of the booth this time. He sat down, directly across from Oliver, uninvited. The vinyl seat groaned under his weight, and the table shifted an inch toward Oliver's side, and Holloway left it there, let the imbalance speak for itself. Oliver lowered his newspaper. He didn't fold it. He didn't set it aside. He simply lowered it enough to meet Holloway's eyes over the top edge, the way a man lowers a book when a child has interrupted his reading. Patient, unhurried, willing to listen but in no rush to respond. "You're still here," Holloway said, not a question. "I am. I told you how things work in this town." "You did. And you're still here." Oliver set the newspaper down, folded it once neatly, and placed it beside his plate. He picked up his sweet tea, took a sip, and set it back on the table with the same precision. "The chicken fried steak is too good to leave, Sergeant." Holloway's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, a fraction of an inch, but Oliver saw it. He was trained to see it. 23 years with the Department of Justice had taught him that the most important things people say are the things their faces say before their mouths catch up. "Where exactly up north?" Holloway asked. "Virginia." "What part of Virginia?" "The quiet part." "What do you do for a living, Oliver Davis, from the quiet part of Virginia?" "A little of this, a little of that. Mostly retired." "Retired from what?" "Government work." Holloway leaned back. His fingers drummed the table once. Index, middle, ring, pinky. A rapid sequence that betrayed the calculation happening behind his eyes. Government work. The words hung in the air between them, vague enough to mean nothing and specific enough to mean everything. "Government work," Holloway repeated. "That's a real detailed answer." "It's the answer I have, Sergeant." "You know what I think, Oliver? I think a man who sits in the same booth 3 days straight, orders the same meal, reads the same newspaper, and gives vague answers about where he's from and what he does, I think that man is either hiding something or looking for something. Which one are you?" Oliver looked at Holloway for a long moment, not through him, not past him, at him. The way a doctor looks at an X-ray, clinical, thorough, already forming a diagnosis. Then he asked one question. "How long have you been serving this community, Sergeant?" The words were ordinary. The tone was ordinary. But something in the construction, "serving this community," landed differently than Holloway expected. It didn't sound like small talk. It didn't sound like deflection. It sounded like the first question on a form, the kind of form that comes with a case number and a federal letterhead.
Holloway didn't answer.
For 3 full seconds, he sat perfectly still, his fingers frozen mid-drum on the table. The diner seemed to hold its breath around them. Eleanor, behind the counter, stopped wiping. Nadine, halfway between 2 booths with a coffee pot, stopped walking. Then Holloway blinked. The moment broke. "Long enough to know who belongs here," he said. "And who doesn't?"
He stood up.
The vinyl exhaled. He straightened his belt, tugged the hem of his shirt, and looked down at Oliver with an expression that was meant to be authority, but had, for the first time in 20 years, a hairline fracture running through it. He walked back to his booth. Shepard was waiting. "What was that about?" "Nothing. Guy's a drifter. He'll move on."
But Holloway didn't pick up his coffee.
He sat with both hands flat on the table, staring at the window but not seeing the parking lot, not seeing the street, not seeing anything except the echo of that question. "How long have you been serving this community?" Turning over and over in a part of his brain he rarely used. It was the word serving. Nobody used that word, not in Millhaven. People said working, been on the force, been a cop. Nobody said serving. That was a word from press conferences and disciplinary hearings and congressional testimony. That was a word with weight. That evening, in the small room above Eleanor's house, Oliver opened his laptop and typed a single entry into the case file.
Day 3.
Subject exhibits established pattern of intimidation, verbal degradation, physical posturing, territorial control of public spaces. Escalates when met with non-compliance. Does not adapt strategy when provocation fails. Recommend continued observation. Subject will self-escalate. He closed the laptop, removed his glasses, looked out the window at the patrol car drifting past Eleanor's house for the second time that hour, its headlights sweeping across the porch like a searchlight that had learned to be patient. Oliver had measured Holloway in 3 days. He knew the type. The aggression was real, but beneath it was something fragile. An authority built entirely on the silence of others. Remove the silence, and the authority collapses. All Oliver had to do was keep sitting in booth 4, keep ordering the chicken fried steak, keep being calm, and wait for Holloway to do what men like Holloway always do when they cannot make someone afraid. They get louder. They get reckless. They make mistakes. And Oliver would be there, watching when it happened.
Day 5. The diner was fuller than usual.
15 people, maybe 16. A couple in their 70s sharing a plate of biscuits and gravy near the door. A young mother with a toddler in a high chair by the window. 2 construction workers in dust-covered boots hunched over their coffees at the counter. A group of 3 women, church friends from the look of their Sunday-adjacent blouses, talking in low voices in the booth behind Oliver. And Nadine Buckley, moving between tables with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that the fastest way through a shift was to keep your head down and your hands full. Oliver sat in booth 4. Same seat, same meal. Chicken fried steak, sweet tea, collard greens. The plate had arrived 4 minutes ago. He had taken 2 bites. The steak was good. Eleanor's batter had that heavy, peppery crust that cracks when you press a fork through it. The kind of cooking that doesn't come from a recipe, but from 40 years of doing the same thing until your hands know more than your memory. He was not reading the newspaper today. He was watching the door.
He had felt it coming since yesterday.
The shift in Holloway's rhythm, the way a man who has been circling a problem stops circling and starts moving toward it. 3 days of Oliver sitting in booth 4 without flinching had done something to Holloway that Holloway himself probably couldn't name. It wasn't anger. Anger was simple. This was something deeper, the slow, corrosive realization that his authority had been tested by stillness and found insufficient. Men like Holloway didn't process that realization quietly. They processed it with their hands. The door opened at 7:31. Holloway came in first. Boots, belt, badge. The full weight of the Millhaven Police Department compressed into one man's walk. Behind him, Shepard. Behind Shepard, 2 more officers, younger, broader, names Oliver had already cataloged in his file, Perkins and Galt. 4 uniforms, 4 sets of boots on Eleanor's tile floor. The diner didn't go quiet this time. It went dead.
The old couple stopped chewing.
The young mother pulled her toddler closer. The construction workers stared into their coffees as if the answers to very important questions had suddenly appeared at the bottom of their mugs. The churchwomen folded their hands and looked at the table. Eleanor, behind the counter, set down the coffee pot with a soft click that sounded, in that silence, like a door being locked. Holloway didn't go to his booth. He walked straight to booth 4. Shepard, Perkins, and Galt fanned out behind him, not in formation exactly, but close enough to formation that the message was unmistakable. This was not a conversation. This was a demonstration. Oliver looked up from his plate. His fork was in his right hand. His napkin was on his lap. His face held the same expression it had held for 5 days, steady, unhurried, utterly without fear. "Morning, Sergeant." Holloway didn't answer the greeting. He stood at the edge of the booth and looked down at Oliver's plate. The chicken fried steak with 2 bites taken out of it, the collard greens untouched, the sweet tea sweating in its glass, and his lip curled. "You know what your problem is, Oliver? You don't listen. I told you this ain't your kind of place. I told you how things work. And here you are, 5 days, same booth, same food, sitting here like you own something." "I'm having lunch, Sergeant, that's all." Having lunch. Holloway turned to Shepard and the others. "You hear that, boys? He's having lunch." The officers didn't laugh, but they shifted their weight forward, a collective lean that said, "We are here, and we are with him." Holloway turned back. He placed both hands on the edge of the table and leaned in, close enough that Oliver could see the veins in his neck, the pores on his nose, the thin sheen of sweat forming along his hairline despite the air conditioning. "Let me tell you something about lunch, Oliver. Lunch is a privilege. Sitting in this booth is a privilege. Breathing in my town is a privilege. And privileges can be revoked." He held the position for 2 seconds, then 3. His eyes searched Oliver's face for the thing he had been looking for all week. The flinch, the flicker, the drop of the gaze that would confirm what Holloway needed to believe. That this man, like every other black man who had ever sat in this diner, could be bent. Oliver set his fork down, placed it parallel to his knife, straightened his napkin. Then he looked up at Holloway and said, in a voice so level it could have been used to calibrate instruments, "Is there something I can help you with, Sergeant?" Holloway's right hand moved. It happened fast. Not the speed of impulse, but the speed of a decision that had already been made hours ago, maybe days ago, in some back room of Holloway's mind where consequences don't exist and authority is never questioned. His hand shot forward, grabbed the edge of the tray, and flipped it off the table. The plate hit the floor first. It didn't shatter. It cracked, a clean split down the middle, the 2 halves spinning away from each other like the wings of a broken bird. The chicken fried steak landed face down on the tile. Gravy sprayed in a wide arc, across the floor, across the booth leg, across Oliver's pants, across his shoes. The collard greens scattered like wet confetti. The glass of sweet tea tipped, rolled off the table edge, and exploded on the tile. Ice and liquid and glass spreading in every direction. The sound was enormous in that silent room. The crack of the plate, the wet slap of food on tile, the shatter of glass. And then, nothing. A vacuum of sound so complete that you could hear the ice cubes sliding across the floor, could hear the sweet tea dripping off the edge of the booth seat, could hear Eleanor Finch's breath catch behind the counter like a door slamming shut inside her chest. Holloway straightened up. He looked down at the mess, the food, the gravy, the broken glass, and then he looked at Oliver and he smiled. Not a real smile, the kind of smile that exists only to let the other person know that what just happened was intentional, was enjoyed, and could happen again. "Now clean it up." His voice carried across every booth, every table, every pair of ears in that room. "Get on your knees and clean it up, or I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs." 15 people in that diner. Not one made a sound. Not one stood up. Not one reached for a phone. Except one. Nadine Buckley. She was standing 3 feet behind Perkins, holding a coffee pot in her left hand and her phone in her right. The phone was angled low, pressed against her apron, the camera lens pointed at Holloway's back. She had started recording 11 seconds before the tray hit the floor. Her hands were shaking, her face was white, but her thumb was steady on the screen, and the red dot in the corner was blinking. Oliver looked at the food on the floor. He looked at the gravy on his shoes. He looked at the broken glass, the scattered greens, the sweet tea still spreading across the tile in a slow, dark stain. He took his time. He let the silence breathe. He let every person in that diner feel the full weight of what had just happened. The public humiliation of a man whose only crime was sitting in a booth and eating a meal. Then he looked up at Holloway. "Are you finished, Sergeant?" Holloway's smile faltered. "Not much. A millimeter, maybe less, but enough." That was the wrong response. He had expected fear. He had expected anger. He had expected the man to drop his eyes, mutter an apology, slide out of the booth, and walk out the door the way every other black man in Millhaven had walked out of every other door for the past 20 years. Quickly, quietly, with their dignity stuffed in their pocket like a receipt they'd never be allowed to use. Instead, Oliver reached into his jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate. His right hand moved across his chest, slipped inside the left panel of his canvas jacket, and emerged holding something. Not a weapon, not a wallet, a slim, black leather credential case, government issue, with a gold seal embossed on the front that caught the overhead fluorescent light and sent a single bright flash across Holloway's face. Oliver set it on the table. He did not open it. He did not explain it. He set it on the table the way a man sets down a loaded gun, carefully, quietly, and with the absolute certainty that everyone in the room understood what it meant. The diner was so silent you could hear the ice cubes melting on the floor. And Holloway's hands, the same hands that had swept the tray off the table 4 seconds ago, stopped moving. Nobody moved. The credential case sat on the table between the remains of a sweet tea stain and a smear of gravy. Small, black, unremarkable except for the gold seal on its face. The way Oliver had placed it, centered, deliberate, with the seal facing Holloway, stripped it of every innocent interpretation. Holloway's eyes dropped from Oliver's face to the case and stayed there, fixed, the way a man stares at a sound in the dark before his brain decides whether to fight or run. "Open it," Oliver said. Same register, same pace, but something underneath had shifted, a gravity that hadn't been there before. The quiet authority of a man who was no longer observing. Holloway didn't move. His hands, the same hands that had sent a plate of chicken fried steak shattering across Eleanor's floor, hung at his sides like they had forgotten how to work. Shepard took a half-step backward. Perkins and Galt exchanged a look that civilians exchange when they realize the building they're standing in might be on fire. "I said open it, Sergeant." Holloway reached for the case. His fingers touched the leather. They were trembling, not dramatically, but with the fine, involuntary vibration of a man whose nervous system had received information his brain was still refusing to process. He flipped it open. Inside, on the left panel, a photograph. Oliver James Davis, clean-shaven, wearing a suit and tie. Beside the photograph, a name, a title, and a seal Holloway had only ever seen on television. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Oliver J. Davis, Senior Investigator. On the right panel, a federal badge. Gold. Heavy. Real. Holloway stared at it. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked like a man who had just been told the floor beneath him was a trap door, and it had been open the entire time. Oliver reached into his jacket again and produced a white envelope. Legal size, heavy bond, with a blue federal seal stamped across the flap. He laid it beside the credential case. Pattern and Practice Investigation Order. Case number CR-2024-0891. Authorized by the Attorney General. It names the Millhaven Police Department as the subject of a federal civil rights investigation active for the past 6 weeks. He paused. Let the words settle like stones dropped into still water. I have spent those 6 weeks living in this town, eating in this diner, walking your streets, watching what you do when you believe no one of consequence is watching. Holloway's face had gone the color of old paper. Not white, not gray, but something between. The color of a man watching his career, his freedom, his identity drain out through his feet. I'm not finished. The two words hit the room like a door slamming. Holloway's mouth closed. Oliver stood up, taller than Holloway by 3 inches, a fact invisible when he was sitting, folding newspapers, eating chicken fried steak, playing the quiet man who bothered no one. Standing with the credential case open and the federal seal catching the light, he was something else entirely. Sergeant Holloway, over 6 weeks I have documented 14 incidents of verbal intimidation, 9 illegal detentions, 4 uses of excessive force, and a pattern of racial targeting spanning every precinct in this department. I have your body camera footage, your radio transmissions, your personnel file, and as of 4 seconds ago, 15 eyewitnesses to a federal officer being assaulted by a local law enforcement officer in a public establishment. He looked at Holloway the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, confirming what he already suspected. That is a federal felony carrying up to 20 years, Sergeant. The diner was so quiet you could hear the compressor in Eleanor's refrigerator cycling behind the counter. You could hear the sweet tea still dripping from the booth edge. Drip, 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 like a clock counting down something that had already ended. Eleanor stood behind the counter with both hands pressed flat, eyes wide, tears forming that she did not wipe away. 20 years she had poured that man's coffee and swallowed her words and watched him break her neighbors and her son. Now she was watching him stand with shaking hands, his badge meaning nothing, and a federal seal on her table that meant everything. Shepard had backed against the wall, his hand gripping his radio the way a drowning man grips a rope, unsure whether to call for help or pray nobody answered. Perkins and Galt stood like statues, frozen in the posture of men who had just realized the chain of command they followed for years led directly off a cliff. Oliver picked up the credential case, closed it, slipped it into his jacket. He held the envelope out to Holloway and waited. Holloway took it. His hand shook so badly the envelope rattled against his fingers like a leaf in a wind only he could feel. Oliver looked at him one last time. Then he stepped over the broken plate, the scattered greens, the puddle of sweet tea, the remains of the lunch Holloway had dumped 5 minutes and an entire lifetime ago, and walked toward the door. He did not look back. Behind him, 15 people, 4 officers, 1 federal investigation order, and the sound of sweet tea dripping onto tile. Drip, drip, drip. Then Eleanor Finch exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that sounded like 20 years leaving her body all at once. Nadine Buckley sat in her car in the parking lot behind Eleanor's diner for 11 minutes before she looked at her phone. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since Holloway walked out. She had clocked out early, told Eleanor she felt sick, which wasn't entirely a lie, and gone straight to her 10-year-old Honda Civic with the cracked windshield and the air freshener that had stopped smelling like anything 3 months ago. She locked the doors. She put both hands on the steering wheel. She breathed. Then she picked up her phone and watched the video. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The audio was muffled in places. The phone had been pressed against her apron, but the visual was clear enough. You could see Holloway standing over booth 4. You could see his hand grab the tray. You could see the plate crack on the floor, the gravy spray across Oliver's pants, the sweet tea explode on the tile. You could hear him say it, "Clean it up or I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs." And you could see what happened next. The credential case on the table. Holloway's hands were freezing. The badge, the seal, the silence. Nadine watched it twice. The second time she paused on the frame where Holloway's face changed. That exact moment when the smirk collapsed and something behind his eyes broke like a window hit by a stone you didn't see coming. She opened TikTok. She typed a caption. "Cop dumps black man's food on the floor. Watch what happens next." She added no filters, no music, no edits. She pressed the post. Then she put the phone on the passenger seat, drove home, and didn't look at it again until the next morning. By then, the video had 2 million views. The algorithm caught it within the first hour. TikTok's content engine, that invisible architecture of engagement metrics, watch time ratios, and share velocity, identified the video as a high retention piece before most of Millhaven had gone to bed. The completion rate was 94%, which meant nearly everyone who started watching finished watching. The share rate was 3 times the platform average. The comment section hit 10,000 entries before midnight. By noon the next day, it had 11 million views. By that evening, 38 million. It was no longer a TikTok video. It was a national event. The hashtag came first. Hashtag #DinerJustice. Born in a reply from a college student in Atlanta who typed it without thinking and watched it climb the trending board within 6 hours. Then came the second hashtag, hashtag Oliver Davis, which split the conversation in a direction nobody expected. Because the internet did not agree. The first wave was outrage, pure, clean, unified outrage, the kind that floods comment sections and quote retweets and group chats with the same 3 words. Did you see this? People shared the video with captions like, "This is America," and "This cop thought he was untouchable," and "Wait for the ending." News accounts picked it up. Influencers reposted it. The view count climbed like a fever chart. But the second wave arrived by the following morning, and it carried a different current. So the DOJ sent an undercover agent to entrap a local cop? That's not justice. That's a setup. This whole thing feels staged. Who just happens to be filming at the exact right moment? Federal overreach. They're trying to destroy local law enforcement. The divide hardened fast. On one side, civil rights advocates, black community leaders, legal analysts, and millions of ordinary people who had watched the video and felt their stomachs drop when the tray hit the floor. On the other side, police unions, conservative commentators, and a vocal online faction who framed the story not as justice, but as entrapment, not as accountability, but as an attack on the men and women in blue. A Fox News segment ran under the headline, "DOJ Sting Operation Targets Small-Town Cop. Where are the boundaries?" A CNN panel countered with, "Millhaven is every town. The systemic racism we refuse to see." Twitter became a battlefield. Reddit threads stretched to thousands of comments. Facebook groups formed overnight. Justice for Millhaven on one side. Back the Blue, Holloway was set up on the other. And in the middle of all of it, Carla Jameson was writing. Carla was 31, a reporter for the Millhaven Gazette, a twice-weekly paper with a circulation of 3,000, and a newsroom consisting of Carla, an editor named Phil, who was also the sales manager, and a part-time photographer who was also Phil's nephew. The Gazette covered school board meetings, high school football, and the occasional zoning dispute. It had never broken a national story. It had never needed to. But Carla had lived in Millhaven her entire life. She had grown up watching Holloway's cruiser roll past her grandmother's house. She had written 6 stories in the past 3 years about police complaints. Small stories buried in the back pages, read by no one who could do anything about them. She had filed public records requests that were denied, delayed, or simply ignored. Now the world was watching. And Carla had something the national outlets didn't. She had names. Her first article went up on the Gazette's website at 9 that morning. It was titled, "The Man in Booth 4, What Millhaven Already Knew." It included interviews with 4 witnesses who had been in the diner, a timeline of the incident, and a list of 17 previous complaints filed against Holloway, with dates, case numbers, and outcomes. Every single one stamped, "No further action required." The article was shared 42,000 times in its first day. The Gazette's website, which typically received 300 visits a month, crashed twice before Phil figured out how to upgrade the hosting plan. That afternoon, the Millhaven Police Department issued a statement. It was 3 paragraphs long, written in the careful, anesthetized language of institutional self-preservation. The Millhaven Police Department is aware of the video circulating on social media. Sergeant Dwight Holloway has been placed on administrative leave with pay pending an internal review. The department is committed to the highest standards of professional conduct and will cooperate fully with any inquiries. We ask the public to refrain from drawing conclusions before all facts are known. Administrative leave with pay. The phrase landed on the internet like gasoline on a campfire. Within an hour, it was a meme. Holloway's face superimposed over a beach scene with the caption, "Assaulted a federal officer. Got a paid vacation." Another version showed the diner floor covered in chicken-fried steak with the words, "This is what accountability looks like in Millhaven."
Behind the statement,
Behind the carefully worded paragraphs and the institutional language, there was a closed-door meeting. Chief Randall Briscoe sat in his office with Holloway, Shepard, and the department's attorney, a man named Clifton Price, who had represented the department in every complaint, every review, and every quiet settlement for the past 12 years.
"This will blow over,"
Briscoe said. He was 61, heavy-set, with the ruddy complexion of a man who drank bourbon neat and considered it a food group. He had been chief for 16 years. In that time, he had signed 340 complaint dismissals, approved Holloway's use of force reports without reading them, and maintained the kind of departmental discipline that depended not on rules, but on silence.
"It's a federal investigation, Randall,"
Price said. "This doesn't blow over." "The hell it doesn't. We've handled feds before. They come in, they poke around, they file a report, and 6 months later it's in a drawer in Washington collecting dust." But Price didn't answer. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through the Gazette article, reading the complaint numbers. The same numbers he had helped bury, now displayed on a screen that 38 million people had already seen.
That evening, Eleanor Finch appeared on CNN.
She sat in a studio in Birmingham, wearing a blue dress she had ironed that morning, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady in the way that voices are steady when they have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and have finally been given permission to set it down.
20 years, she said.
20 years that man walked into my diner and treated my customers like they were less than human. 20 years I served him coffee and said nothing because saying something meant losing everything. My business, my home, my family's safety. She paused, looked directly into the camera. My son Daryl filed a complaint after Holloway broke his jaw. You know what happened? Nothing. Same as every other complaint in this town, nothing happens here. That's the system. Nothing happens until someone from the outside comes in and forces it to happen. The interview was viewed 5 million times in 24 hours.
And through all of it,
the videos, the hashtags, the cable news panels, the memes, the outrage, the backlash, the statement, the counter-statement. Oliver Davis did not appear. Not on camera, not on social media, not in a single interview or press release or public comment.
He was in a room in Birmingham,
86 miles from Millhaven, sitting at a desk covered in files. He had watched the video once, not for the content which he had lived through, but to verify the visual quality of the evidence. He had read the Gazette article, noted the complaint numbers Carla Jameson had published, and cross-referenced them against his own case file. Then he closed his laptop, picked up a pen, and opened the next folder.
The public was arguing about a video.
Oliver was building a case, and what he was building went far deeper than one sergeant, one tray, and one diner floor. The video was the spark. The investigation was the fire, and it was about to reach the foundation. The room Oliver worked from was on the 4th floor of a federal office building in downtown Birmingham. A beige, windowless space with fluorescent lighting, a metal desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a whiteboard that covered the entire east wall. The building had no sign on the outside. The elevator required a key card. The hallway smelled like recycled air and old carpet, and the particular brand of government-issue cleaning solution that has been the same since 1974. Oliver had requested the room 5 weeks ago, before he ever stepped foot on the Greyhound bus to Millhaven. He had set it up himself, the whiteboard, the filing system, the secure laptop, the encrypted phone. No assistant, no team, just Oliver, the files, and the work. But now, on day 39 of the investigation, the room had changed.
The whiteboard was full.
Names, dates, case numbers, dollar amounts, and connecting lines drawn in 4 colors of dry erase marker: blue for personnel, red for incidents, green for financial transactions, black for chain of command. At the center of the board, written in large block letters and circled twice, was a single name: Holloway. Radiating outward from that name like the spokes of a wheel were 31 connecting lines, each one leading to a documented incident, a complaint number, or a financial record. But Holloway was no longer the center of what Oliver was looking at, because on the second day after the diner incident, Oliver had found the money. It started with a routine background check, the kind every federal investigation runs on its primary subject: employment records, tax filings, property ownership, credit reports, bank statements. Standard procedure. Most of it came back unremarkable. Holloway earned $84,000 a year. He owned a 3-bedroom house on Birch Lane, assessed at $162,000. He drove a department-issued cruiser and a personal Ford F-150 with 63,000 miles on it. He had one credit card with a $4,000 balance and a checking account with the Mill Haven Community Bank. He also had a second account. It was at a bank in Tuscaloosa, 60 miles away, far enough to avoid the tellers who knew him, close enough to drive in an afternoon. The account had been opened 7 years ago under Holloway's legal name, with a mailing address listed as a P.O. box in a strip mall on Route 82. The current balance was $183,600. Oliver stared at the number for a long time. $84,000 a year in salary, $183,000 in a hidden account. The math did not work. It had never worked. And when the math doesn't work, the money is talking. You just have to learn its language. He called Agent Philip Stanton. Stanton was FBI, 44 years old, based in the Birmingham field office, with 14 years of experience in public corruption cases. He was tall, quiet, methodical, and possessed the rare investigative quality of being genuinely boring to talk to, which meant that suspects consistently underestimated him. Oliver had worked with him twice before. He trusted him the way you trust a bridge you've already crossed in a storm. "I need financial forensics on a Tuscaloosa account," Oliver said, "and I need subpoena authority for the Mill Haven municipal budget, specifically the Asset Forfeiture Fund." "You think this goes past the sergeant?" "I know it does. I just don't know how far yet." Stanton arrived in Birmingham 2 days later with a team of 3, a forensic accountant, a data analyst, and a paralegal who specialized in municipal finance. They set up in the room next to Oliver's and began the work that would, over the following 2 weeks, dismantle the financial architecture of the Mill Haven Police Department, one transaction at a time. The story the money told was simple in its mechanics and devastating in its scope: civil asset forfeiture. The legal practice, controversial, widely criticized, and still technically lawful in Alabama, that allows law enforcement to seize cash, vehicles, and property from individuals suspected of criminal activity without requiring a conviction, without, in many cases, requiring an arrest. The premise was that the property itself was guilty, a legal fiction that allowed officers to take money from people's pockets, label it as evidence, and deposit it into a departmental fund with minimal oversight. In most departments, civil asset forfeiture was a small line item, a few $1,000s a year, a seized vehicle here, a confiscated envelope of cash there. In Mill Haven, it was an industry. Over the past 5 years, the Mill Haven Police Department had seized $2,100,000 in cash and property through civil asset forfeiture. $2,100,000. From a town of 11,800 people, 61% of whom were black, 14% of whom lived below the poverty line. Oliver laid the numbers out on the whiteboard in green marker, column by column, year by year. Year 1, $312,000 seized. Year 2, $389,000. Year 3, $421,000. Year 4, $455,000. Year 5, $523,000. The line was not just going up, it was accelerating. Each year the department seized more, not because crime was increasing, but because the seizures themselves had become the point. The fund had grown from a tool into a revenue stream, from a revenue stream into a dependency. and from a dependency into a machine that required human fuel to keep running.
And the fuel was black.
Stanton's data analyst ran the demographic breakdown. Of the 418 individual seizures documented over 5 years, 391 to 93.5% involved black residents. The average amount seized was $5,028. The median was $3,100. These were not drug busts. These were not organized crime takedowns. These were traffic stops, broken taillights, failure to signal, driving 6 miles over the limit, an officer pulling someone over, finding cash in the console or the glove box or a purse on the passenger seat, and taking it. The law required that seized assets be documented, cataloged, and either returned or processed through the courts. Oliver requested the forfeiture logs. What he received was a spreadsheet with 418 entries, dates, names, amounts, and a column labeled Disposition. In that column, for 386 of the 418 entries, the same 2 words appeared: retained, departmental use. 92.3% of all seized assets were never returned, never adjudicated, never processed through any court. They simply vanished into the department's operating budget like water soaking into sand. Oliver followed the money from the forfeiture fund into the department's books. What he found was not sophisticated. It didn't need to be. The fund was managed by one person, Chief Randall Briscoe. He authorized every deposit. He approved every withdrawal. He signed every quarterly report. And those quarterly reports, which were filed with the Millhaven City Council and were technically public record, were masterpieces of bureaucratic misdirection. The reports listed expenditures under categories so broad they could mean anything: equipment maintenance, training and development, community outreach, operational support. Each category carried a dollar amount that corresponded to nothing verifiable. There were no invoices attached, no vendor names, no purchase orders, no receipts. Oliver spent 3 days cross-referencing the reported expenditures against actual department purchases: vehicles, weapons, uniforms, fuel, office supplies, and found a gap. The forfeiture fund reported spending $1,840,000 over 5 years. The department's actual verified expenditures from that fund totaled $912,000. $928,000 unaccounted for. Nearly $1 million that went into the fund and never came out through any documented channel. It didn't buy patrol cars. It didn't fund training. It didn't support community outreach. It simply disappeared. Except it hadn't disappeared. Money doesn't disappear. It moves. And Oliver was beginning to see where it had moved to. Holloway's hidden account in Tuscaloosa, $183,000. But that was only one account, one officer. Oliver asked Stanton to run financial backgrounds on every officer in the department with more than 5 years of service. 14 officers qualified. The results came back in 4 days. 3 additional officers had secondary accounts with deposits that exceeded their annual salary. Deputy Cole Shepard, the man who had called Oliver nobody, had an account in Montgomery with $41,000. Officer Galt had an account in Mobile with $28,000. Sergeant Perkins had an account in Huntsville with $62,000. Combined with Holloway's $183,000, the 4 accounts held $314,000. Still $614,000 short of the missing $928,000. Which meant the rest had gone somewhere else, somewhere higher. Oliver didn't write Chief Briscoe's name on the whiteboard that night. He didn't need to. The lines were already converging toward the center of the board like rivers flowing toward the same ocean. But he needed proof, not inference, not probability, not the kind of circumstantial logic that collapses under cross-examination. He needed documents, deposits, transfers, a trail that led from the forfeiture fund through the department's books and into the personal accounts of the men who ran it. He called his supervisor in Washington. Catherine Holt answered on the second ring. "I need expanded authority," Oliver said. This isn't one officer. This is a department-wide financial operation. Civil asset forfeiture used as a slush fund, distributed among at least 4 officers, with a gap of over $900,000 that I believe leads to the chief. I'm requesting authorization to subpoena Briscoe's personal financial records and to expand the investigation to include the Millhaven City Council's Oversight Committee. There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation, calculation. Holt was a woman who made decisions the way engineers design bridges, measuring load, stress, and consequence before committing a single beam. "You'll have it by morning," she said. Oliver hung up. He stood in front of the whiteboard and looked at the web of names and numbers he had built over 6 weeks. Holloway's name was still at the center, circled twice in red. But the real story, the story that would bring down not just a sergeant but a system, was in the green lines. The money, the forfeiture fund, the quarterly reports signed by one hand, the accounts that shouldn't exist. The $928,000 that had been taken from the pockets of people who couldn't afford to lose it and funneled into the pockets of men who wore badges and called it law enforcement. 340 complaints. 340 families who had walked into a police station, filled out the paperwork, signed their names, and been told every single time that nothing would be done. Oliver turned off the light. The whiteboard glowed faintly in the dark, the dry erase lines catching the green glow of the emergency exit sign above the door. Tomorrow, the subpoenas would arrive. And the foundation Briscoe had built his career on, that careful architecture of silence, intimidation, and financial manipulation, would begin to crack. It was not going to blow over. Terrence Wilkins had not spoken about what happened to him in 3 years. Not to his wife, not to his mother, not to the pastor at Greater Hope Baptist who had asked him gently, twice, if there was something he wanted to talk about. Terrence had smiled both times, said he was fine, and changed the subject. He was good at changing the subject. He had become good at a lot of things since that night. Sleeping with the lights on, avoiding Route 9, checking his rearview mirror every 30 seconds, and folding the truth into a small, hard shape, and burying it so deep inside himself that most days he could almost pretend it wasn't there. But it was there. It was always there. The night it happened was a Thursday in October 3 years ago. Terrence was 31 then, driving home from his shift at the distribution warehouse outside of town. He was on Route 9, doing the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, radio tuned to a gospel station his mother liked. He had worked 10 hours. He was tired. He wanted to get home, eat the plate his wife had left in the microwave, and fall asleep on the couch. The blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror at 9:14. He pulled over immediately. He turned off his engine. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way his father had taught him when he was 16, the way every black father in Millhaven taught every black son before they were old enough to drive. Hands visible, mouth shut. Survive the stop. Holloway approached the driver's side window. He was alone. No partner. No body camera running. Terrence didn't know that at the time, but he would learn it later, in the worst possible way. License and registration. Terrence handed them over. His hands were steady. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir." "Your left taillight is out." It wasn't. Terrence had checked both taillights that morning, the way he checked them every morning, because driving in Millhaven with a broken light was not a maintenance issue, it was an invitation. "I checked it this morning, sir. It was working." That was the sentence. 5 words. Polite, factual, and delivered in the most respectful tone Terrence Wilkins had ever used in his life. And it was the sentence that changed everything. Holloway told him to step out of the car. Terrence complied. Holloway told him to put his hands on the hood. Terrence complied. Holloway told him to spread his legs. Terrence complied. Then Holloway asked if he had any cash in the vehicle. Terrence said yes, $3,200 in an envelope in the glove box. His daughter's first semester tuition at Millhaven Community College, saved over 11 months from overtime shifts. Holloway took the envelope. He counted it in front of Terrence, standing in the headlights of the cruiser, flipping through the bills with his thumb like a man counting cards. "Where'd you get this kind of money?" "I earned it, sir. It's for my daughter's school." "That's what they all say." Holloway put the envelope in his pocket. Then he told Terrence that the cash was being seized under civil asset forfeiture, pending investigation. Terrence asked what investigation. Holloway didn't answer. Terrence asked how he could get the money back. Holloway told him to file a claim with the department. Terrence filed the claim the next morning. He never received a response. He filed a second claim 2 weeks later. No response. He went to the station in person. The desk officer told him the matter was under review. It was never reviewed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened 45 seconds after the money went into Holloway's pocket. Terrence, standing with his hands on the hood, said one more sentence, the last sentence he would say to a police officer for 3 years. "That money is for my daughter, please." Holloway hit him. Not with a baton, not with a weapon, with his fist. A short, compact punch to the left side of Terrence's rib cage, delivered from behind, aimed at the floating ribs, the kind of strike that doesn't leave a bruise on the surface, but breaks things underneath. Terrence felt 2 ribs crack. He dropped to his knees on the gravel shoulder of Route 9. He couldn't breathe. The pain was so sudden and so complete that his vision went white. Holloway leaned down and spoke directly into his ear. Terrence would remember every word for the rest of his life. "You talk about this, and I'll make sure your daughter grows up without a father. You understand me? Nod." Terrence nodded. He drove home with 2 broken ribs, no money, and a silence that would last 3 years, until Oliver found him. It wasn't difficult. Terrence's name was in the complaint file, one of 340, stamped with the same red ink as every other, "No further action required." But unlike most of the others, Terrence had attached a medical report to his complaint. 2 fractured ribs, left side, consistent with blunt force trauma, treated at Millhaven General. The doctor's notes were clinical and precise, and contained a single sentence that Oliver read 3 times. Patient states injury occurred during a traffic stop. Patient declined to identify the officer involved. Oliver knocked on Terrence's door on a Wednesday evening, 6 days after the diner incident. Terrence opened it, saw a black man in a worn canvas jacket holding a federal credential case, and stood in the doorway without speaking for what felt like a full minute. "My name is Oliver Davis. I'm a senior investigator with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. I'm investigating the Millhaven Police Department, and I'd like to hear what happened to you." Terrence didn't invite him in, not right away. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and looked at Oliver with the expression of a man who had been offered water in a desert and wasn't sure if it was real or a mirage. "He said he'd kill me," Terrence said. "He said my daughter would grow up without me." "He can't touch you now," Oliver said. "You have the full protection of the federal government. I'm asking you to tell me what happened. Not for me, not for the case. For every person in this town who's been too afraid to say it out loud." Terrence let him in. He talked for 2 hours. His wife sat beside him on the couch, holding his hand, hearing most of it for the first time. When he described the punch, the sound it made against his ribs, the way the gravel felt on his knees, the words Holloway whispered in his ear, his wife closed her eyes and squeezed his hand so hard her knuckles turned white. Terrence was not the last. Over the following 9 days, Oliver and Stanton contacted 23 individuals whose names appeared in the complaint files. Of those 23, 4 agreed to provide sworn testimony under federal protection. A warehouse worker whose car had been seized during a traffic stop and never returned. A 70-year-old church deacon who had been handcuffed in his own front yard for refusing to let officers search his home without a warrant. A young mother whose boyfriend had been beaten during an arrest and who had been told by Shepard, personally at her front door, that if she filed a report, Child Protective Services would receive an anonymous tip about her parenting. 4 witnesses, 4 stories, 4 pieces of a pattern that stretched back over a decade. But the piece that broke the case open did not come from a victim. It came from inside the department. Deputy Cole Shepard called Agent Stanton on a Tuesday night at 11:41. He was sitting in his personal vehicle in the parking lot of a gas station on Route 82, the same road that led to Holloway's hidden bank account in Tuscaloosa. His voice was low, fast, and carried the unmistakable frequency of a man who had been awake for a very long time, deciding whether to make this call. "I want a deal," Shepard said. "I want immunity, and I have something you need."
Stanton asked what he had.
"Recordings. Chief Briscoe. Audio recordings of direct orders to delete body camera footage after use of force incidents. I've been keeping them for 2 years. 19 recordings. Dates and times logged." Stanton was quiet for 3 seconds. "How soon can you be in Birmingham?" Shepard arrived at the federal building at 7 the next morning. He brought a personal laptop and an external hard drive. On the hard drive were 19 audio files, each one time-stamped, each one containing a conversation between Shepard and Chief Briscoe. The recordings were devastating. In one, dated 14 months earlier, Briscoe's voice was clear. "Delete it, Cole. All of it. If it doesn't exist, it didn't happen. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked."
In another from 9 months ago,
"I don't care what the camera shows. The camera shows what I say it shows. Wipe the drive, file the report, move on." In a third, recorded just 6 weeks before Oliver arrived in Millhaven, "Holloway handled it. That's all the council needs to know. That's all anyone needs to know. We clean our own house. We always have." 19 recordings. 19 direct orders from the chief of police to destroy evidence of civil rights violations. Oliver listened to all 19 in a single sitting. He sat in the windowless room with his headphones on, his eyes closed, and his hands folded on the desk. He didn't take notes. He didn't need to. The recordings spoke for themselves. The casual tone, the mechanical efficiency, the absolute confidence of a man who had been destroying evidence for so long that it had become routine, like taking out the trash. When the last recording ended, Oliver removed his headphones. He opened the case file on his laptop and typed a single line. "Evidence sufficient for federal prosecution. Recommend scheduling of public hearing." He picked up the phone and called Judge Adrian Knowles at the federal courthouse in Birmingham. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., federal courthouse, public hearing." Oliver hung up. He looked at the whiteboard. The names, the lines, the numbers, the web of corruption he had spent 6 weeks mapping in 4 colors of dry erase marker. Holloway at the center. Briscoe above him. Shepard, Perkins, Galt branching off to the sides. And at the bottom, written in small letters that Oliver had added on the first day, a line that was not a name or a number, but a count. 340. 340 complaints. 340 families. Tomorrow they would hear every one of their names read into the federal record. Oliver turned off the light. Tomorrow he would stand in a courtroom and lay it all on the table. The money, the recordings, the testimony, the data, all of it. The way he had laid his credential case on the table in booth 4 of Eleanor's diner. Quietly, deliberately, and with the absolute certainty that what he was setting down could not be swept onto the floor. The Hugo L. Black Federal Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, sits on the corner of Richard Arrington Jr. Boulevard and 5th Avenue North, a limestone building with tall windows, bronze doors, and the kind of quiet, deliberate architecture that exists to remind you that what happens inside is permanent. Names carved into courtroom walls do not get erased. Testimony entered into the federal record does not get deleted. And decisions made under that roof do not blow over. At 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, the hallway outside courtroom 3B was already full. Reporters filled the first 2 rows of the gallery. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the Associated Press, Reuters, and 14 local outlets from across Alabama and the surrounding states. Camera crews lined the back wall. A court officer had set up an overflow room down the hall with a live video feed for the 60-plus people who couldn't fit inside. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, some carrying signs, some carrying phones, some simply standing in the early morning heat because they had driven from Millhaven and wanted to be present for what was about to happen, even if they could only watch it on a screen. Online, the live stream had already reached 2 million viewers before the hearing began. The number would climb to 4 million by midday. At 8:55, the courtroom doors opened and the principals took their places. On the left side of the room, the defense table. Sergeant Dwight Holloway sat in a gray suit that didn't fit him well. The jacket tight across the shoulders, the collar pressing against a neck accustomed to a uniform. His hands were on the table. His face was the color of cold oatmeal. Beside him, his attorney, a man from Tuscaloosa whose name would not matter after today. Behind them, at a separate table, Chief Randall Briscoe sat with Clifton Price, the department's attorney. Briscoe wore his dress uniform, pressed and pinned, as if the costume could substitute for the authority it once represented. His jaw was set. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the room, the gallery, the cameras, looking for something that wasn't there. Control. He was looking for control, and for the first time in 16 years, he could not find it. On the right side, the prosecution table. Agent Philip Stanton sat with the forensic accountant and the paralegal, 3 banker's boxes of documents stacked beside their chairs. The boxes were labeled by category: financial, personnel, audio, testimony, in black marker, neat and precise. And at the center of the table, one empty chair. At 9 o'clock exactly, Judge Adrienne Knowles entered the courtroom. She was 58, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that did not require volume. She had presided over federal civil rights cases for 22 years. She had seen corruption in uniforms before. She had seen men in suits lie under oath. She had learned, over 2 decades on the bench, that the most important thing a judge can do in a courtroom is not speak. It is listen. This hearing is convened pursuant to the authority of the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, in the matter of case number CR-2024-0891, the United States versus the Mill Haven Police Department. Lead investigator, please take the stand. The side door opened. Oliver Davis walked into the courtroom. He wore a charcoal gray suit, a navy blue tie, and black Oxford shoes polished to a mirror finish. His hair was trimmed close. His posture was straight. His credential case was clipped to his breast pocket, the gold DOJ seal visible from every seat in the room. He looked nothing like the man in the worn canvas jacket who had sat in booth 4 eating chicken fried steak. He looked nothing like the man Holloway had called a stray. He looked nothing like the man whose lunch had been dumped on a diner floor while 15 people watched in silence. He looked like exactly what he was: a senior federal investigator with 23 years of service who had spent 6 weeks inside the machinery of a corrupt police department and was now prepared to take it apart, piece by piece, in front of the entire country. Oliver took the stand. He adjusted the microphone. He opened a folder, and he began. 6 weeks ago, I sat in a diner in Mill Haven, Alabama, and ordered a chicken fried steak. It ended up on the floor. The courtroom was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of people waiting for something to happen, the deep, compressed silence of people who know that what is happening right now will be remembered. What I am about to present is the result of a 42-day undercover investigation into the pattern and practice of civil rights violations by the Mill Haven Police Department. The evidence includes 143 pages of field observations, 28 audio recordings, 16 body camera files obtained through federal subpoena, sworn testimony from 5 civilian witnesses, 19 internal recordings provided by a cooperating department member, and a complete forensic analysis of the department's civil asset forfeiture fund spanning 5 fiscal years. He turned to the first page. The data came first. Oliver presented it the way a surgeon presents a diagnosis, without emotion, without editorializing, letting the numbers carry their own weight. $2,100,000 seized through civil asset forfeiture over 5 years. 93.5% of seizures targeting black residents. 92.3% of seized assets never returned. 340 complaints filed, every single one dismissed by Chief Briscoe. 0 disciplinary actions. 0 internal investigations. 0 accountability. He displayed the financial analysis on a screen mounted above the witness stand. The forfeiture fund's reported expenditures versus verified expenditures. The gap, $928,000 unaccounted for. The hidden bank accounts. Holloway's $183,000 in Tuscaloosa, Shepard's $41,000 in Montgomery, Galt's $28,000 in Mobile, Perkins's $62,000 in Huntsville. $314,000 accounted for. $614,000 still missing. Oliver paused. He looked at Briscoe. The remaining $614,000, he said, was traced through a series of transfers from the forfeiture fund to a municipal account labeled Discretionary, Chief's Office, and from that account to a personal investment portfolio held at a brokerage in Atlanta, Georgia, under the name of Randall W. Briscoe. Briscoe's attorney put a hand on his arm. Briscoe didn't move. His jaw was still set, but the muscles in his neck had gone rigid. Two cords of tension running from his collar to his skull like cables holding up a bridge that was already swaying. Then Oliver played the recordings. The courtroom heard Briscoe's voice for the first time. Calm, casual, administrative. Delete it, Cole. All of it. If it doesn't exist, it didn't happen. The words came through the courtroom speakers with the clarity of a man who had said them so many times they had lost all weight, the way a prayer loses meaning when it becomes routine. But in this room, under these lights, with cameras recording and 2 million people watching, the words carried the weight of a confession.
The second recording.
I don't care what the camera shows. The camera shows what I say it shows. Wipe the drive, file the report, move on. The third. Holloway handled it. That's all the council needs to know. That's all anyone needs to know. We clean our own house. 19 recordings. Oliver played 6 of them. Each one landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into glass. A sharp, irreversible impact followed by cracks spreading in every direction. Then came the witnesses.
Terrence Wilkins took the stand.
He wore a white dress shirt buttoned to the collar and dark trousers pressed with a crease sharp enough to cut paper. His hands were clasped in front of him. His voice was steady, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had been afraid for 3 years, and had finally decided that fear without a voice was worse than fear with one. He told the courtroom about the traffic stop, the tail light that wasn't broken, the $3,200 in the glove box, his daughter's tuition money, saved over 11 months of overtime shifts. He told them how Holloway counted the bills under the headlights, how the money went into Holloway's pocket, how he asked, "Please," one word, and how that word earned him 2 broken ribs and a whispered threat that kept him silent for 1,095 days. Then Terrence stood up from the witness chair. He unbuttoned his shirt. He pulled the fabric aside, exposing his left rib cage to the courtroom. A scar ran along the lower ribs, faded now but still visible, the permanent record of a fracture that had healed crooked because Terrence had been too afraid to go back to the hospital for a follow-up. "He did this," Terrence said, "and he told me no one would believe me." The courtroom was silent. A woman in the gallery pressed her hand over her mouth. A reporter in the second row stopped typing. The live stream comment feed, which had been scrolling at a rate of hundreds per second, slowed to almost nothing, as if 4 million people had simultaneously held their breath. Oliver waited. He let the silence fill the room the way water fills a vessel, completely, without gaps, without mercy. Then he turned to Holloway. Holloway was sitting at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface. His attorney had leaned over twice to whisper something. Holloway had not responded either time. He was staring at a point on the wall behind the judge's bench, the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had spent 20 years controlling rooms and had just realized that this room would be the last one he ever controlled. Oliver looked at him for a long moment. Then he asked one question. "Sergeant Holloway, how long have you been serving this community?" The same words, the same cadence, the exact question Oliver had asked in the diner on day 3. Sitting in booth 4, folding a newspaper, looking up over a plate of chicken-fried steak. But in this room, under oath, with the badge meaning nothing and the evidence meaning everything, the question was no longer a question. It was a verdict delivered in the form of a sentence that Holloway himself had refused to answer twice. Holloway did not answer it a third time. 15 seconds of silence. The camera in the back of the courtroom zoomed in on Holloway's hands. They were trembling, a visible, undeniable tremor that traveled from his fingers to his wrists to the surface of the table. The same hands that had dumped a tray of food on a diner floor. The same hands that had punched Terrence Wilkins in the ribs. The same hands that had taken $3,200 from a glove box on a dark road, now shaking under the gaze of a man they had mistaken for nobody. Judge Knowles waited until the silence had said everything it needed to say. Then she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient grounds for federal prosecution. Sergeant Dwight Holloway, 6 counts of civil rights violations under Title 18 United States Code, Sections 241 and 242. Chief Randall Briscoe, 3 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of corruption and misuse of federal funds. Officers Perkins and Galt, pending further investigation. Additionally, this court orders an immediate, comprehensive federal review of the Mill Haven Police Department under the Pattern and Practice Statute. She looked at Holloway, then at Briscoe, then at the gallery, the reporters, the cameras, the citizens of Mill Haven who had driven 86 miles to sit in a courtroom and hear their own town called to account. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down once, a single clean sound that echoed off the limestone walls and settled into the record alongside everything else. The numbers, the recordings, the testimony, the scar on Terrence Wilkins's ribs, and the question that Dwight Holloway would never answer. The sentencing came 4 months later. Sergeant Dwight Holloway stood in the same courtroom, in the same gray suit, in front of the same judge. His attorney had filed 3 motions for dismissal. All 3 were denied. His police union had issued a statement of support that was quietly retracted after the 19th recording was played on national television. His wife had filed for divorce on the 2nd day of the trial. His house on Birch Lane was listed for sale by the 3rd week. Judge Knowles read the sentence without inflection, the way a doctor reads a diagnosis that is serious but no longer surprising. 8 years. Federal prison. No parole eligibility for 6. Holloway stood with his hands at his sides. He did not speak. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at his attorney. When the marshals approached with handcuffs, he extended his wrists without being asked. The mechanical compliance of a man who had spent 20 years putting other people in restraints and had finally learned what the metal felt like from the other side. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, a phrase drifted through the courtroom, unspoken but present in the memory of everyone who had watched the diner video. "I'll find a reason to put you in cuffs." He had said those words to Oliver Davis over a plate of chicken fried steak and a puddle of sweet tea. Now, the cuffs were on his hands, and the reason had found him. Chief Randall Briscoe was sentenced 2 weeks later. 5 years, federal prison, 3 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of corruption. His dress uniform hung in a closet that no longer belonged to him. His signature, the same hand that had stamped "No further action required" across 340 complaints, would never appear on a departmental document again. Deputy Cole Shepard received a reduced sentence of 14 months in exchange for his cooperation. Officers Perkins and Galt were suspended without pay pending further investigation. Their cases referred to a federal grand jury. The Department of Justice issued a consent decree, a legally binding agreement that placed the Mill Haven Police Department under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. An independent monitor was appointed. Body cameras became mandatory for every officer on every shift, with footage stored on a federal server that no chief, no sergeant, and no deputy could access or delete. The use of force policy was rewritten. The civil asset forfeiture program was suspended pending a complete audit. And the money came back, $2,100,000. A federal judge ordered the full amount returned to the community through a restitution fund administered by an independent board. Terrence Wilkins was the first to file a claim. His daughter's tuition, $3,200 plus interest plus damages, was deposited into his account on a Thursday afternoon. He drove to the bank, looked at the receipt, and sat in his car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before he drove home and told his wife. The 70-year-old deacon received compensation for the unlawful search of his home. The young mother received a formal written apology from the department and a settlement that she used to move her family to a house in a neighborhood where police cars driving past did not make her children go quiet. 340 complaints. Not all of them could be made whole. Some of the people who filed them had moved away. Some had died. Some had buried what happened so deep that no restitution check could reach it. But for the first time in 20 years, the filing of a complaint in Millhaven was no longer an act of futility. It was an act that mattered. And that, for a town that had been taught to expect nothing, was something close to everything. On a Saturday morning in late October, 5 months after the hearing, Oliver Davis returned to Millhaven. He came by Greyhound, same bus line, same concrete bench under the tin awning at the Chevron station. He carried the same duffel bag and the same leather backpack. He wore the same canvas jacket with the torn pocket, not because he needed a disguise, but because it was his jacket, and he was the kind of man who wore things until they were done, not until they were out of fashion. He walked 4 blocks east on Caldwell Avenue. The boarded-up furniture store was still boarded up. The pawn shop still had bars on its windows, but the foreclosure notices were fewer. And the patrol cars, he counted 2 in a 14-block walk compared to 7 5 months ago. 2 cars, driving at normal speed, not idling, not watching, not occupying. He reached Eleanor's diner at 11:30. The bell above the door jingled when he walked in. Eleanor was behind the counter, same apron, same posture, same sharp eyes. Nadine Buckley was between tables with a coffee pot. A couple sat in the booth by the window. A man at the counter was reading a newspaper. The diner was quiet in the way that diners are supposed to be quiet. The comfortable silence of people eating, talking, existing without fear. Eleanor saw him. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at him, standing in the doorway in his worn jacket, duffel bag over his shoulder. And something moved across her face that was too complex for a single word. Relief, gratitude, grief, pride. The expression of a woman who had waited 20 years for someone to walk through her door and change something, and who was now looking at that person and trying to figure out how to say thank you for something that shouldn't have needed to be done in the first place. She walked to booth 4. She pulled a clean tray from behind the counter. She set it down on the table. Chicken fried steak, collard greens, sweet tea, and a side of cornbread that wasn't on the menu but was on the house. Oliver sat down. He looked at the tray. He looked at Eleanor. "This one's on me," she said, "and it's staying on the table." Oliver smiled. It was the first time anyone in Millhaven had seen him smile, a small, quiet expression that didn't ask for anything and didn't announce anything. The smile of a man who had done what he came to do and found, in a plate of chicken fried steak served without fear, the only receipt he needed. He ate slowly. He thanked Nadine for the refill. He folded his napkin when he was done, and he left a $100 bill under the plate, tucked beneath the edge so it wouldn't blow away when the door opened. Then he picked up his bags, walked out into the afternoon sunlight, and headed for the Greyhound station. The bus was waiting. The driver opened the door. Oliver stepped on, took a window seat near the back, and watched Millhaven shrink behind him. The rooftops, the steeple of Greater Hope Baptist, the water tower with the town's name painted in letters that were starting to fade. He didn't look back. The diner was still there. The booth was still there. And for the first time in 20 years, anyone in Millhaven, regardless of the color of their skin, could walk through that door, sit in any seat they wanted, and eat a meal without looking over their shoulder. But Oliver knew what the numbers told him, and the numbers told him this. Millhaven was one town, one investigation, one diner, one tray of food dumped on one floor. Across America, in small towns and big cities, in diners and courtrooms and the back seats of patrol cars. How many lunch trays were hitting the floor right now, with nobody watching? How many Holloways were still wearing badges? How many Eleanors were still pouring coffee in silence? And how many people were sitting in booth 4, waiting for someone to notice? If this story moved you, subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories of people who refused to stay silent. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you were sitting in that diner? And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the next Oliver Davis might be watching.
Holloway thought he was putting a nobody in his place, but Oliver Davis had been watching him for 6 weeks, and that credential case on the table, it ended everything. What I keep thinking about is this. 340 families walked into that police station, filled out the paperwork, signed their names, and every single time the same stamp came back. No further action required. 340 times they were told their pain didn't count. But Oliver didn't show up loud. He showed up quiet. He sat in booth 4, ordered his chicken fried steak, and let the truth do the work. That's the lesson. Dignity doesn't need to fight back with anger. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to move. I want to ask you something real. Have you ever been dismissed? Told your complaints didn't matter? Made to feel like nobody? Because NNR served that man's coffee for 20 years in silence. Not because she was weak, but because survival sometimes looks like waiting for the right moment. That moment came. Tell me in the comments, whose courage in this story hit you hard?